Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate, an investment bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. Plenty to come. A day that will be remembered for the moment in which the JSE All Share powered through, and I do mean powered through, 100,000 for the first time. Just another reminder of the sort of difference between markets and the greater economy. At the same time, Stats SA just talking about how inflation for the month of June was just 3%. So inflation is still very low. Technically now, of course, creeping within the target band of the Reserve Bank for the first time in a couple of months, but still will sort of start, or dare I say spike, that conversation around changing the inflation target. And of course, beef prices, if it hadn't been for the foot and mouth outbreak, food prices might have been a little bit lower and maybe inflation would be lower still. That said, with inflation, there's pretty much always something. Some developments in the Fly Sasfin strike tonight, and you heard in the EWN bulletin the latest on that. But one of the things that struck me as fascinating was that Solidarity, the trade union, seemed to be suggesting that they would give in a little bit with Fly Sasfin on salary, so the increase wouldn't be that important, if Fly Sasfin agreed to their demands on a roster. And some of the demands do seem to me to, make sense. Sort of at least a 2-day weekend, so a Saturday and Sunday at home every 5 weeks to be with family, the ability to swap shifts between pilots if something is happening, someone's going to score her sort of 100th goal in a hockey field or something, you'll be able to actually go and sort of swap the shift so you can go and watch that if you're a pilot. Something about this, though, that's quite important, is that the pilots are effectively saying their time, and I suppose their family time, is more important to them than money. And isn't that interesting, that people are making that determination? And yes, someone will say it's easy for you to say if you're paid 2.3 million rand a year, which is sort of what some of the pilots are. Even so, they will have financial hopes and dreams, and they will probably be thinking it's quite a big sacrifice for us to give up the money, the salary we could have got, because we want to spend the time with family. I thought that was very interesting. I wonder if you've ever made a decision like that, or if you went the other way and how it panned out for you and your family. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567, and of course voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702. Vodacom had an update today, and a lot of it was about Egypt. They've done particularly well there. But there was also a little note. It seems that there was no growth in prepaid calls. And this surely is because now, if you're making a call and you are going to use WhatsApp to make that call instead of a normal cell phone call. You've heard me say this before, but I'm always very nervous when I'm on a WhatsApp call that I'm going to miss a word, that the timing isn't quite right. But some WhatsApp calls, the quality is just crystal clear. I wonder if you have a view on that. I know plenty of people, and actually it goes past age. It's not as if older people are sticking to the old-fashioned phone lines. It seems actually the other way, maybe because they've sort of worked it out and they're trying to save money. Sometimes they're on someone else's Wi-Fi or whatever it is. But WhatsApp calls just taking over from normal voice calls. How's that changing your life? Be good to hear from you on The Money Show this evening.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
I'm sure in your life there have been moments that you remember just because they were important, just because a number was involved. Maybe it was the time your daughter turned 1, your son turned 21, or you turned, 50. Well, today it was the turn of the JSE, the All Share Index, hitting 100,000 points for the first time. And it may just be a reminder that despite all of the geopolitical risk, capital markets keep growing. So long as companies and the people they serve keep growing, innovation keeps going. Dr Leila Fourie is the CEO at the JSE. Leila, good evening. It's just a number, but it is still important, 100,000, right?
Stephen, indeed, it really is an important psychological point. And if you look at the growth trajectory over the past couple of decades, we started this index at 100 points in 1960, and over the last 65 years, it's delivered returns of about 11%, but hitting the 100,000 mark is a very important psychological milestone, and it comes at a year after the GNU was established, almost, in fact, exactly a year, and really demonstrates a very material upswing. And what's particularly interesting is that we started in a mining field in the tents. Some of the biggest drivers of our economy has been mining, which then retracted a little bit, and now mining is indeed some of the big drivers, driver in our current 100,000 point mark.
No, of course, gold shares. I mean, Harmony is just incredible. Harmony and so many of the others have just been incredible over the last few months. So you point to the formation of the National Coalition. That's fine. Many people do. Most people do. And yet there's a lot more geopolitical noise, a lot more risk. I wonder if something's changed with investing. There's a famous theory about markets that nothing ever happens. They always recover. I think maybe despite all of the tariff noise, people here and in other markets are buying the dip more quickly. Do you think something's changed in the way investors understand markets?
Well, Stephen, I don't think necessarily a lot has changed in the way markets work. We saw enormous jumps and crashes even 100 years ago when mining started, when funding started in mining. It's become a lot more sophisticated, and we do see really massive returns and volatility in the intervening years. And if you have a look at what I said earlier, which was, that we've generated overall 11% annualized returns. In some years, many people have lost, all their investments. So I do think that there is a tighter and an improved financial literacy across the world, and many more people are starting to invest, and tax incentives and new regulations around pension fund investment have driven that. But ultimately, in part it's animal spirits, and in part it's fear. Markets have gone up and down, and investors continue through the cycles.
At the same time, as anyone will know, just look around, our economy is battling to grow. And I do worry about what looks on the face of it to be a disconnect. It's a lot more complicated than that. But the economy is stuck and the JSE is breaking records. Now, part of it is because of things we do not control. No one controls the gold price. Part of it is because of deal listings. Part of it is because of things that are happening in other places. Not a lot of it is to do with us. But I do, the picture that it sends to people who don't understand markets or don't spend a lot of time is that none of this makes sense. I'm finding that it's impossible to get by. My economic position is actually worse than it was. How can this be? And I kind of wonder somehow if this is all sustainable. I mean, that's quite a strange question in a way.
Stephen, yes, there is a separation between the performance of large listed entities, many of whom derive their income outside of South Africa, and perhaps what some people are experiencing on the ground. That said, we have seen a point of inflection post the GNU, the establishment of the GNU, and while that's not necessarily coming out in GDP growth, it is certainly reflected in a very much more improved inflation level. And our country has, we have no load shedding, very little load shedding, and there are many policy reforms and government and public and private sector reforms that have been introduced that have genuinely turned the economy around. So a year ago, had you spoken to me, I probably would have been in a much more sanguine and downbeat mindset. And yet, post the GNU, notwithstanding the fact that we're not out of the woods, we have a long way to go, there are a number of green shoots, and load shedding is one of them. There have been some quite important reforms that we've seen. We've seen a lot of M&A activity in the market. Yesterday there was a Pepcore book build which shot up our trading values to 68 billion rand versus the norm of 26 billion. So we are starting to turn the corner, and yes, the world globally does paint a dismal picture in some areas, but locally we are starting to rebuild.
Plenty of talk around at the moment, Leila. I'm sure you've seen it, that you might be joining some other bourses and moving to 24-hour trading. Several are going to do that in the next year or so. And I understand the logic, especially because dual listings are a big business for you. Are you expecting a big demand for it? And I presume most people would be moving shares around on the JSE, but probably in a different time zone.
Stephen, extended hours have been discussed globally in major exchanges for quite some time now. And I do think that both New York, London and parts of Europe shifting to a 24/7 approach will help our liquidity. And particularly, as you say, because of the dual listed. However, we need to move with our market, and really what is important is a balance between the real-time trading response opportunities. So if we wake up and there's a major crisis brewing in the East, or if something happens in the US and markets are closed, it is good to be able to respond real time. That said, market depth, quality and liquidity is also really important. And we need to ensure that price formation, the price at which companies are trading, happens in a liquid and deep market, and that it truly reflects the overall position. And if you have one or two traders responding to an event at 3 a.m, that might not necessarily reflect the overall market position. So it's something that we are engaging our market participants on. We're certainly very responsive, and we will contemplate the pros and cons and make a final call. But that said, what works well for deep, liquid, large, developed world economies might not necessarily be appropriate for a country like South Africa.
Such an interesting point about what happens if you only have a couple of people trading at one time. Dr. Leila Fourie, thank you, CEO of the JSE.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
So, I don't know if this is going to affect how you watch TV and what you watch and where you watch it, but the Competition Tribunal now giving Canal Plus permission to merge with MultiChoice. There are some conditions, but the merger goes through. Duncan McLeod, founder and editor at Tech Central. Duncan, good evening. The Competition Tribunal, they've been under a lot of flack recently for decisions, for delays. This seems to have gone through, relatively speaking, sort of smoothly.
It has, maybe even surprisingly so, given MultiChoice's historical position in the broadcasting industry in South Africa. And it's certainly true as well that the competition authorities have come under a lot of criticism for the time it's taken them to conclude the Vodacom acquisition of a stake in fiber operator Maziv, which owns, of course, Vumatel and Dark Fiber Africa. So I think that pressure is they're probably feeling some of that pressure, and maybe this relatively rapid decision around MultiChoice is a result of that.
It's not really a merger, is it? I mean, isn't Canal Plus taking over?
It is effectively an acquisition by Canal Plus, French broadcaster listed in London, of MultiChoice.
Is it going to change the content that you see on MultiChoice products? I mean, there'll be a new company and all the rest, but if you look at what DSTV and Showmax offer, they're under a lot of pressure. Netflix, Disney Plus, all of the others. There was for a while a sort of content war between streamers. Even Netflix and Disney seemed to battle a little bit during that time. It's a very competitive market.
Yes, MultiChoice 10 years ago was in a very different market than the market it's playing in today. And that's, of course, started with the launch of Netflix. I forget when that was now, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And we've seen other streamers, as you mentioned, come into the market, including Prime Video from Amazon, Disney Plus. So these are big global content giants. And so it doesn't have the market to itself anymore. And as broadband has proliferated, particularly fiber broadband and uncapped internet access, many consumers have looked at these alternatives and said, well, why am I spending so much money on DSTV when I could pick up one of these services instead? So the result of that, and I think also just the state of the South African economy and the economies in which MultiChoice operates across Africa, is putting incredible pressure on them. They lost 1.2 million DSTV subscribers over the last year or so, and that was on top of 1.6 million the previous financial year. And so that they need to make some changes. I think Canal Plus will probably help them make those changes, but they are already busy with a wide-ranging internal review. I had a wide-ranging conversation, in fact, with Byron du Plessis, the MultiChoice South Africa CEO, just last week, and he revealed that they are going through a wide-ranging review that could, in fact, see the DSTV bouquets as they exist today completely changed. I think they're struggling to get customers, particularly in the youth segment. Kids, when they leave home, are not subscribing to DSTV, probably not surprising. They're signing up for streaming services, they're using TikTok and the like. And he has said that the top priority of theirs to ensure that they can get that youth market back. So they're going to make some big changes, and they've said they're going to make them by the first half of next year. So it's going to be fascinating to see what they do.
Sure, fascinating. I mean, some reporting that MultiChoice will separate SuperSport from DSTV. I was surprised at that. It seemed that live premium sport was what kept people hooked. I mean, obviously, Canal Plus will have a different idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's if they do this, they're certainly following what broadcasters around the world have done. In fact, in my interview with him, Byron du Plessis said that they're probably a bit late with this. They need to listen to their customers, and I think there's probably not enough of that in the past. In a competitive market, if your customers are telling you the one thing and you're providing them with something else, it's a recipe for disaster. And they seem to have got that message now, and I think they're talking about rejigging their bouquets, and if you don't want the sport, then you don't have to pay for it.
Sure. Duncan McLeod, thank you. Founder and editor at Tech Central.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Chris Stewart's portfolio manager at 91. Chris, good evening. 100,000 points for the JSE All Share. It is kind of one of those days you'll remember.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen. I think we should celebrate positive markets today. And I guess, 100,000 is a milestone of some sort. Market up 19% so far this year on a total return basis. And that is, a pretty, that's more than 1 year's worth of expected return from equity markets, all rolled up into a fairly positive 6 or 7 months. So whether it follows through to the second half of the year remains to be seen, but it's a pretty decent outcome, led predominantly, I guess, by the PGM and gold stocks in particular. You've got most of the platinum stocks at least doubling already year to date, and most of the gold stocks doing pretty well as well. And that's been on the back of buoyant PGM prices and sort of almost daily records in the gold price that we've seen posted thus far this year. Naspers and Prosus as index heavyweights weighing in as well as British American Tobacco and Anheuser-Busch. So, what you'll see from that list of contributors is that most of them are not massively linked to the, vagaries of the South African economy. And it's been the stocks that are more dependent on SA growth, the South African retailers in particular, to an extent the South African banks that haven't necessarily kept up with the market's performance thus far.
One of the fascinating stories today, Adcock Ingram looks like they're going to delist. There's an offer, and it's quite a premium for shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, they did come out with a cautionary yesterday. We saw, a very sharp spike in the share price yesterday, in fact, before the cautionary was released. So I don't know if there was, some leak around that took place yesterday, but we saw a big day yesterday, another big day today. The share closed at 67 Rand 70 today. And Natco Pharma, an Indian pharmaceuticals business, have indicated that they are interested in putting in a cash offer at 75 Rand per share for 35.75% of the company, and that's effectively all of the shares that aren't currently owned by Bidvest. Bidvest owning the other approximately 65% of the company.
Mr. Price, they seem to be underwhelming today. I realise there's a sort of school holidays issue with the timetable, and that changes when people buy clothes. But investors were clearly expecting, weren't just hoping, but were expecting for a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, a disappointing sales update from Mr. Price. This is for the first quarter of their 2026 financial year. Remember, they've got a March year end, so this is the period April, May, and June. And June in particular looks like it was a very difficult month from a sales perspective. Some degree of seasonality, as you indicate, due to the relative timing of school holidays and back to school dates. And Mr. Price themselves indicating that July was a much better month than June. But nonetheless, we've seen quite a pronounced slowdown for the first quarter. And if you look at the run rate for first quarter sales versus the market's expectation for full year sales, it looks as though, unless things can turn around quite dramatically, we're in for downgrades in terms of revenue expectations and commentary around gross profit margins also a little bit soft. So generally speaking, I think the market bringing back the expectations of earnings for Mr. Price right now.
Chris Stewart, thanks so much. Portfolio manager at 91. Well, it's the kind of day where there's certain people whose voices you think just should deserve to be on the radio because it's 100,000 points on the JSE All Share. And I was thinking to myself, we'll speak to Chris Stewart. You've heard his comments and his contribution. But I kind of want to know if David Shapiro has thoughts. And do you know, he made contact. In fact, we managed to get back with him now. David, good to talk to you. 100,000 points, big day for the JSE.
A massive day. And I think, what's exciting is it was driven up, or we've reached this with mainly resources picking up. And it's been a long time since we've had a proper resource market where gold, platinum shares have gone up. It's, in the early 2000s. But as I say, when I joined the market in 72, we were the resource capital of the world. And it's always exciting to have mining shares driving the market higher. But another thing, Stephen, it's what I'm a big tech man. I invest heavily in tech, but what excites me about this is that globally we're seeing a broadening out of markets, and I think that's where I'm sure we're in for a very strong second half of the year as these markets broaden out. And I think that's what I'm excited about the JSE. That we're coming into the party as well. We're also part of the party. I mean, there've been some. Chris mentioned them. There've been some really big gains. From Impala up 115% year to date, Anglo Gold 130. We haven't seen this for many, many years. Valterra, which is the old Anglo Pat. So this is what's driven it up. It's Harmony. All of these shares have given a boost to the market. So great to see commodities, leading the way.
David, I really appreciate you getting in touch. Thanks. David Shapiro, the veteran stockbroker and chief global equity strategist at Sasfin. And as you know, Chris Stewart's portfolio manager at 91. It's a big day on the JSE. Still 6:30 though. Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Well, voice notes to come through this evening, and of course, good to hear from you tonight on this issue. Plenty of stories around whether you prefer to WhatsApp, whether you prefer a voice note, whether you actually just prefer a good old-fashioned call. I must say, despite the cost, I'm someone who really does prefer a good old-fashioned call. I actually like to sort of, I feel like I'm touching your blood if I'm having a proper conversation. By the way, I noticed, and plenty of reporting about this today, that there are now going to be new tariffs imposed on top-loading washing machines that come from particular countries, and particularly Thailand. If you're going to buy a top-loading washing machine from Thailand, it's going to cost you an extra 67%. And our International Trade Administration Commission clearly, and I think there must be good grounds for this, believing that Thailand and a couple of other countries are dumping these goods here. In other words, what they're doing is they're selling the washing machines for less than it costs them to make them. They're getting rid of them, and it's dumping under international rules, and you're not allowed to do that. It did remind me years and years ago when I was growing up, I don't know how it happened, but we ended up with 2 washing machines of the same model in our house, both of them very old. And I must have been about 9. I asked my dad, why do we have 2? And he says, well, one's never going to work. And I was, why did you buy it? And he said, spares for the other one. I don't think you can do that with washing machines today. Voice notes coming through tonight.
Stephen, hi. During COVID, for some reason, Vodacom stopped servicing my home particularly well. So telephone calls were particularly patchy, and so I switched to WhatsApp. That was in 2020. And I haven't seen a particularly good reason to go back. So the vast majority of my phone calls are done on WhatsApp now.
Yeah, I suppose if it works for you, why go back? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
702 with Stephen Grootes.
Email him on stephen@702.co.za.
Well, more information beginning to come out about proposed changes to labour laws. On the face of it, it would make it easier for smaller companies to fire workers and perhaps for companies to release workers in their 3-month probation period for no stated reason. You can imagine unions are not going to take this lying down. This is all going through NEDLAC. Andrew Levy is a labour analyst at Andrew Levy Associates. Andrew, good evening. 50 different changes, quite a long list that are being proposed. The most important that stick out for you, it does seem, on the face of it, this will be better news for companies than for workers.
It does look like that, Stephen, but I think if you take a slightly deeper look, it's actually not the case. I mean, the first point I want to make is one of our biggest causes of labour market inflexibility is the way in which dismissal procedures have in fact tried to ape and emulate a court process, when immediately behind the dismissal process stands the CCMA, which is free, which is accessible, and that does the full job. Managements are not trained. They don't have the time. They don't have the skills to emulate the courts. It was never meant to be. Now, the issue with the 3 months is a very important one. And the notion of the drafters, and let me say that I do know them. I know the way they think. I also know that their basic philosophy is that until such time as both the employer and the employee are happy that the relationship is going to work, there is little or no protection. But once you are confirmed, almost like an academic with tenure, it's very difficult to get rid of you. So what has happened here is that for the first 3 months, no employee has the right to refer anything to the CCMA unless it's automatically unfair, which I'll come back to. And it's not only 3 months, it's a longer probation period if that is necessary and justifiable. So the parties will get to know one another. Now, of course, if you abuse it and you do anything which is unfair discrimination, racism, bullying, harassment, etc., then you go to the CCMA and the penalty can be doubled. So I think the idea that this particular thing on dismissal is unwinding worker rights is just not correct.
Okay, I mean, one of the things that smaller firms have complained about is that they're subject to exactly the same employment law as the biggest firms. Is that changing at all?
Yes, it is, Stephen, and this is also very important for job creation. I mean, everyone knows, including government, because they've been saying it for years, that the engine of job growth is the small business. You start a small business, it's just you, it's your spouse, and it becomes 3 and then becomes 4 and hopefully one day becomes a huge enterprise. And if you weigh them down, then in point of fact it stifles that growth. So the most important things there are firstly that where there are bargaining council wages set, which are much higher than the national minimum wages, startups and small businesses are exempt from those wages for the first 2 years to give them a go. And that will create employment opportunities, no question about it. With regard to small businesses generally, and just in passing, one of the strange things is that the amendments, which I believe will go through, have no definition of what a small business is. So we've got to figure that one out.
Sure.
But having said that, the burden for the small business is less, simply because they don't have the time. You know, if your van's panel beaters, you've got 3 employees, where do you have the time to spend 3 or 4 days in a hearing? So that is easier. But what it also stresses, and this is where we went wrong, is that the essence of fairness when it comes to dismissal is what one jurist has called simple industrial justice. It's not the same standard as the appeal court. What it means is fundamentally the opportunity for the person to have their say before a decision is made. And if you read the code, that is so clear. It's absolutely clear. So it seems to me, particularly, that the SAF2 objection is that it will do away with the formal hearings and the evidence and this, that, and the other. It's just not right. The fact is, if you need that, you can get it on application, free, no risk, no cost, and that's where it will be done. And of course, employers will understand that. So all in all, I think that, for me, is probably the most significant step forward.
Andrew Levy, really appreciate the time tonight. Thank you. Labour analyst at Andrew Levy and Associates. I'm not sure which side of the equation you're on. Are you an employer or an employee, a manager or a worker? I don't know if you believe, and I've heard from plenty of small business owners over the years, that they want it to be easier to fire people. They'll hire more people if it is. I've heard plenty of arguments from unions over the years that everyone should be treated the same. Which side are you on that? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Well, we were talking earlier about the JSE, the All Share going past 100,000 for the first time. Does tell you that there's still a lot of sort of movement in the economy and in markets generally. And the Mine Workers Investment Corporation actually saying that they're looking for new acquisitions, new firms that they can buy. And Chalpe Kole is the Chief Investment Officer at the MIC. And Chalpe, good evening to you. Obviously, you look for value when you want to buy something. You want to see what the potential for growth is. Are you looking for other things as well? You represent mine workers, essentially. I imagine you have other aims over supporting black businesses, for black-owned businesses, for example.
That's correct, Stephen, and thank you very much for having me on your show. Maybe in a nutshell, the themes that we look to take advantage of, and maybe let me preface this by saying businesses don't need to... They don't need to qualify for each and every one of the themes, but if they do exhibit business models that take advantage of any one of these themes, these would be businesses that we are interested in investing in. Those themes being businesses that take advantage of changes in consumer patterns and behaviors, businesses that can withstand economic volatility, which is very topical at the moment. Technology-enabled businesses, models that challenge existing ways of doing businesses, business driven by addressing a social need, and businesses that take advantage of public sector inefficiencies. In a nutshell, those are the types of businesses we look to invest in. We believe that's where pockets of additional growth are available. And the only additional aspect that we would consider is businesses that give us portfolio resilience through geographic expansion.
Okay, in other words, a little bit of diversity. When you when you invest into a company, is it just capital that you bring to the table? I mean, you've been around for quite a while. You've been invested in lots of different things. Are there other things you sort of bring to the deal rather than just money in Shapiro?
So we'd like to believe that in addition to the capital that we can bring to bear, there is a track record of delivery in terms of corporate strategies that deliver value that our team can bring to bear. We'd like to believe that as a long-term partner to businesses like the owner of 702 Prime Media, Piedmont, First Rand, Tracker, Metrofile, just to name a few, we've exhibited over the years that indeed by partnering with us, you form a long-term relationship, and we equally have a network that we can bring to bear, which assists businesses in terms of their organic and inorganic growth strategies.
It's interesting because we're in kind of a difficult spot in the economy. Things are not really moving. Are there many companies to buy? I mean, there's some obvious things that you might want to buy a stake in, but it's actually quite difficult to find investment opportunities, companies in areas where there might be a lot of growth and they're actually for sale.
True, it is a tough market, but notwithstanding that, we do believe that there are pockets of value. We are a long-term investor, so that does give us a vantage point in terms of looking through the cycle. And by adopting those ethos in terms of our investment outlook and approach, we do believe that puts us in a position to take advantage, notwithstanding the challenges in the short term.
I mean, do you have any optimism that things are actually going to change? I think in Shapiro, a lot of people are kind of giving up hope that our economy is ever going to shift. I mean, there's sort of reform going on, some of it very important, some of it looks like it's only happening around the edges. How do you see it?
So we are proponents of the reform agenda. Certainly, phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela, we do believe will deliver on some of businesses' expectations in terms of unlocking the bottlenecks that are holding us back. But global uncertainty, some of the geopolitical shifts that we're seeing driven by tariffs and potential changes in trade patterns are, of course, a concern. But I'm an optimist at heart and would like to believe that notwithstanding these challenges, with the right partners on board, which we hope we are one of, we certainly can deliver that long-term growth.
In Shapiro, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. The Chief Investment Officer at the Mine Workers Investment Corporation. Well, plenty to come in the next little while. I don't know how you access the web, but the way that you do has probably changed dramatically without you really noticing. You no longer are spending time being linked by your search engine to actual websites, but to results from ChatGPT or AI or something. And that is changing the world as we know it around us in plain sight without us even really noticing. That to come. Your calls too on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. It's 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Plenty coming up at the end of the search engine optimization era. It makes sense if you think about it in terms of how you actually access the web. Talk about that in just a moment. Really important story, actually, and really shows you how the world is changing. Wendy Nola, your consumer ninja, a story tonight about what happens when your landlord simply refuses to pay you your full deposit. And your shapeshifter this evening is Kurt Ackerman. An amazing story. Grew up in the US, from what I can see. We'll ask him. Spent his time studying business in Chicago, which is where you want to go if you want to study business, and then went into PR and then had a complete change of heart. I mean, literally a complete change of heart, and ended up working in food systems. Also, though, as an academic, has a sort of separate life, looking at how important it is to make sure that people are able to grow their own food. Not everybody has that kind of journey. So looking forward to that this evening. Also, I mentioned earlier the Fly Sapphire pilots. If you look through their deal and through what Solidarity, their trade union, has said in the last 24 hours or so, they're actually willing to give up most of their salary demand if they get their roster demand. So in other words, from what I can see, they're basically putting their family and their time ahead of their money. I thought that was very interesting on all sorts of levels, because what that really seems to mean to me is that their time is more valuable than their money. And I thought that was interesting. I wonder if you've been in a position like that ever. I realize quite a strange position to be in, perhaps, but I'd be very interested to hear from you if you have, and which way you went. I know some people who've literally gone, taken the money for as long as they can sort of stand it. And then actually when the damage gets too bad, stop it. But no, it's knowing when the damage is bad. I've spoken to recruitment people who say that, you can say to someone, money will work for 2 years. And after that, your family takes too much strain if there's too much traveling involved. Maybe. I don't know. Your view, please. 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
Well, over the last year, maybe the last 2 years, there's been a major shift in how you access the web. And I actually didn't really notice until it was sort of spelt out to me. So in the past, if you wanted to ask Google an impossible question, how do I keep my pool blue? There's a good example of an impossible question. You would get a set of results based on websites, and you would be able to go look at the websites, and you'd actually give those websites traffic. Now, some of them paid. This is the search engine optimization. As I understand the practice, they paid to be the first hit. This is why if you search in Google any kind of English phrase, you probably get a movie because they've paid for it. Never mind that the phrase is much older than the movie, or the book is much older. Now, if you type in that impossible question, how do I keep my pool blue? I'm not going to get website hits. They'll be there. But first, I'm going to get some idiot AI trying to tell me how to keep my pool blue, and they're still going to get it wrong. So you can just imagine the implications. It's a fascinating change that we've started to see, and I think that maybe we haven't quite realized what's happening here. Keegan DaCosta is an AI utilization specialist from Too Many Robots, the fractional AI agency. Keegan, good evening. Good to talk to you. I mean, search engines have really changed here.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Stephen. And to me, SEO isn't dead. It's just evolving. People are calling it generative engine optimization, answer engine optimization. And I think we're getting a little bit too caught up in that. We can think of it like a train engine. So people used to get from A to B, and they used the steam engine, and that worked for a while. But think of it now, you've got the electric train. And when that came about, there came with a whole bunch of new ways of doing things. But at the end of the day, it's still transport. So people are still searching. They're always going to be searching. And they used to be looking on Google, other traditional search platforms. But now the engine has changed, and we need to evolve with it.
So the engine has changed, but if you are, for example, and I say this is very close to my heart, I must just warn you, but if you work for a news organization and you've got a business, and many people do, actually publishing news, people won't, the traffic won't go to your site anymore. It'll go to AI if someone's asking, who's the president of South Africa?
Yes, correct. So now that these LLMs, large language models, are being used for search, something like Gemini will probably pop up first. And it's still picking up what is on the net. The only problem is a lot of us have our websites guarded or blocked off from these LLMs. And that's a very important thing, that if you want to get found, the first thing is to unblock that capability. And it sounds quite silly because it's something that we all used to, get our guard up about, but it's something that we need to drop, and we need to start thinking about how to get found in a different way, because it's not just giving us the answer or the single list of answers and who paid more to be on top. Now it's giving something else a lot more contextual and a lot more personalized, and it's giving us solutions to the problem, and not just a list of things where we have to now go on our own devices and try find.
Okay, so if I'm a pool shop and I want money to help Stephen keep his pool blue, I want to be found, I want to stick my hand up. in the past, I would have paid something to Google. How do I do it now?
So there's three ways that you should go about it. The first is from a technical point of view. You want to make sure that you are discoverable to LLMs, and it's called crawling and indexing. And these AI tools, they basically scour your website, scour the net, and if they don't have the ability to do that, then they won't refer you. So first thing I would do is go onto something like OpenAI that owns ChatGPT, and they've got a form, a data opt-in form, where you submit your site and it gives them permission to look at your site and start using it. Without that, you are going to be a tiny, tiny needle in a massive, massive haystack. And the second thing is your content. It's not just one thing now to have your content about what your business does, but you have to move around how do you problem solve. So the old content mindset was, this is what we do. The new content mindset with LLMs is, how do we solve a specific problem and move on from there?
Okay, so for my pool shop example, and you might notice this is close to home too. In the past, your adverts would have been chlorine at this cost, right? Now, if I want to be noticed, I would need to say that the website needs to say, helping you keep your pool blue. It's that kind of narrative almost. It's a different use of the language.
Yes. So instead of giving you, let's say, a list of ingredients that say I'm a pool shop and I want you to find my company, I could tell you, these are the ingredients I use. This is what my service is. This is how much I charge. This is where my locations are. This is how many people I have. That doesn't matter as much anymore. But if I have more content on how I have helped people in your situation, if I tell that story, if I give a before and after, then these generative models pick up that. And because they predict what words and what context comes next, that's going to be the answer you get. Unless you specifically ask for what are the ingredients I need to keep my pool clean, that's a different story. So you have to make it contextual. You have to help it tell that story.
Is it going to require people to spend actually a lot more time managing their websites? I mean, a pool shop's often a very small business. I mean, there are chains, but often they're a small business. They're not going to be able to do that or keep up or something. I mean, or I suppose there are people who will do it for you for not much money, actually, because everyone's going to be doing it and there'll be plenty of market for it.
Well, what we've actually seen with a lot of our customers is they've been doing things the old way with this new model, and they've spent so much time and money playing by the old rules that when you do an audit and when you get under the hood and you start learning how to play with the new rules, it's actually a lot quicker and a lot more cost efficient when it comes down to it. And I mean, if you want to do it yourself, you can use tools like Nightwatch. It's a great way to start tracking to see where you are being placed with these LLM models.
Okay, I see. For someone who I don't track AI as closely as you do, there still seems to be issues with hallucinations, with the fact that sometimes facts get included. There were more stories this week in South Africa about, the fact that a law firm had submitted legal papers citing precedents that didn't exist. At some point, that'll probably be dealt with, I'm fairly sure. But if you are now searching things, is that going to be a problem? I mean, in some way, it's always been a problem because there are always websites that lie. So I suppose the risk is probably the same.
Yes, I would say the risk is the same. And we always believe that you have to have a human in the loop. So no matter what you see on LLMs or what you see, even not just on Google search, always verify it. So fact check it and, make sure that it is something that you feel confident in. What we are seeing a lot of is someone can pay to have their website to be number one on Google, and they might not be as truthful with their services as they make out to be. And that for me has always been a bit of an ethical thing, paying to get on top. But what these LLMs are doing is they are taking all the information that they have and they are still comprising what is going to be best based on billions and billions of data points and information, stories and things that they've seen before. So they'll still give you what is as best as possible an answer as you're going to get. And then hopefully they will then recommend you as part of that answer. They're not going to specifically say, Stephen's pool company does X, Y, and Z, and that's going to be the sole truth. They're going to give you an answer and then suggest you along with it. So either way, have a human in the loop. And like all technology, trust your instincts and double verify it.
Keegan DaCosta, thanks so much. A utilization specialist from Too Many Robots, the fractional AI agency. One of those changes that's really been happening almost under our noses. Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Well, I don't know if you find yourself in the position of renter or owner. In other words, if you're renting your property or if you're actually if you own it or if you're letting it out. And the tension between people who rent out property and people who are renting property can sometimes be huge. We often hear landlords complaining it's impossible to get someone out when they're not paying. What happens, though, when your landlord, once you've moved out, refuses to pay back your deposit? And this can happen quite easily. Wendy Nola, your consumer ninja, has been looking at a case like this. Wendy, good evening. What happened here?
Hi, Stephen. So the complainant, who's a well-known media personality and asked me not to name him, he found himself in this position on vacating his apartment in Rosebank that he'd rented for the previous 2 years. He chose not to renew his lease because they wanted to hit him with a 10% rental escalation. So he moved out at the end of May. And as is customary, there was an exit inspection done with a representative of the managing agents, who in this case were Agro Rentals. And he told me she did identify some issues in the apartment, including cracked tiles and silicone needed in the kitchen, nothing too serious. So normally, if that's if you caused that as a tenant, that would be for you to pay, which is fair enough. But
so that would come out of your deposit, right?
Yes, it would. But even then, they can't thumbsuck an amount, Stephen, which I get a lot. It has to be, all the amounts have to be justified with genuine invoices. But even then, I've seen some incredibly inflated invoices, but that's another story. In this particular case, the woman from the managing agents who did this exit inspection with this personality noted those things, but next to it was written for the landlord's account, because there was an ingoing inspection done when this chap moved in 2 years previously, and those issues were noted then. And that's what's so crucial, to be present as a tenant when you go into an apartment, and when you leave, everything's noted so that you can't then be hit with something that was pre-existing and now been made to pay for it and have your deposit suffer. Right. So.
Okay, so now we know that some of the damage was done before, some of the damage was during the person's time. That should have been sort of the end of it. It should have been worked out, should have had the money back. It
should have been the end of it, because there were a couple of issues, but as is the case, they are put down to wear and tear, and that shouldn't be for your account as the tenant. So he should have got 100% of his deposit back, plus interest actually, in 2 years, which was just over 11,000 Rand. But it wasn't the end of it, because a few days later, he got an email from the company's portfolio manager telling him that they would be withholding his deposit until they'd investigated the damage and determined who was responsible. He said that it was odd. He bumped into the agent who'd done the outgoing inspection with him, and she was also surprised, saying, no, there was nothing for you to pay for. So
this sounds like, what's the phrase? Sharp practice. It looks like we're going to try and do this. You're not going to take us on. We're a big evil company, and sometimes they are.
Well,
isn't there regulation around this?
There is a regulation. Look, it could have just been really poor internal communication, but he was pushing the issue. So, yeah, it's all a bit unfortunate. So the Rental Housing Act, which governs this, says that if there are no damages noted, the outgoing tenant should get refunded their deposit with interest within 7 days of them vacating. And that's what he told his that portfolio manager in response to her saying, look, we've got to look into the damage or whatever. And he said quite rightly, it was pre-existing damage or reasonable wear and tear, I owe you nothing. But he got no response. He started being ghosted, and that's when he contacted me, as people do.
Sure.
So I took up the case with Agro, and the response from their regional manager for the rental division in Gauteng was to say the delay has been resolved. Funny that. Within a day or two. The processing of the refund was contingent on receiving the final utility account, which we have now obtained. If at any stage we didn't receive clear communication from the tenant, from our office, we apologize. And then simultaneously, my complainant got an email saying a deposit refund form will be sent to you before 12 today to sign as an acknowledgement of funds which need to be processed to your account. So,
okay, is it
resolved.
normally the case that they wait? You have to wait for the municipality to send you a bill. I mean, you could be waiting a long time.
Exactly.
I mean,
No.
is that really how it works?
No, it's not how it works. The Act is very clear that he should be refunded within 7 days. And also, Stephen, there was not a word when he was pushing back about the damages, how you can't hold me responsible for damages according to these forms. Nobody came back to him and said, well, actually, we're waiting for your utilities bill. And in any event, he says it was a whole 128 Rand when it finally came. And that, and even then there was no communication around it. And he says, in any way, it was preposterous that it took them a month and a half to actually draw this outstanding utility bill, which they then didn't mention to me. So I went back to the regional manager and I said, how long on average does it take Agro to refund deposits to departed tenants in such circumstances? In other words, there were no defects that could be attributed to them. Didn't get an answer to that. I got a sidestep. I got a copy-paste internal policy on how deposit refunds should be handled, and it was all great and in keeping with the legislation, but clearly it wasn't followed in this particular case. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, what do we learn from this? In a situation, when you're renting property, you're often the kind of person with the less power, with less power in this relationship, and that's what makes it quite difficult, even if you know the law.
It does, and especially if it's a property that's in high demand. If it's a renter's market rather than the tenants, you should not take any shortcuts. So insist on having an ingoing inspection so that any pre-existing damage that you're happy with, to live with, is noted on there so they can't be pinned on you later. And then also do the inspection, the exit inspections. Never be too busy or whatever. And also, if you wanting them to happen and they don't happen for whatever reason, the law says that they still have to then refund you in full. So they can't, say, oh, well, we didn't have an inspection, so we're pinning this on you. So we have a lot of rights, or tenants have a lot of rights. It's just you have to know them and to use them accordingly, as this guy did, right? And then he still didn't get his deposit back. So in such a case, you can go to the rental housing tribunal, or you can come to a journalist such as myself who will step in and get what you're owed.
And lucky that the landlord cared about that. I mean, sometimes they don't.
Yes,
Go ahead, they'll say. There's a lack of accommodation. I don't care.
That is a very good point. Sometimes they have a don't care attitude. And so I suppose the other bit of advice would be is to do some background checks on the landlord and or rental agency so that you don't get stuck with this one that has a reputation for doing that.
Wendy Nola, thank you very much indeed. Your Consumer Ninja on The Money Show tonight. Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Well, I was looking through the profile of your shapeshifter this evening, and I thought to myself, we've done some interesting journeys in our time on Shapeshifter. I don't know if I've ever spoken to someone who spent some of their professional life in a sort of American, I think, Chicago PR firm, and decided to chuck it all in and ended up in Cape Town, basically helping people grow food and doing really important things and studying the issue. Well, that is the story of your shapeshifter this evening. Kurt Ackerman is the CEO of the South African Urban Food and Farming Trust, also an academic research fellow at the Global Risk Governance Program. And the risk that he looks at, I am presuming, is really about hunger, about the fact that not enough people have enough food. And I suppose what and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the unfairness of food systems. Kurt Ackerman, it's quite a journey. I'm very glad that you've taken some time to share it with us on The Money Show. Good evening.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Just confirm you can hear me just fine.
Yeah, we can. Thank you. I'm guessing from your voice that you grew up in the United States, quite far away from Cape Town. What kind of community were you growing up in? Were you growing up in a farming community, maybe?
So I was not. I grew up in one of these American college towns. So only, no postgraduate degrees, and a place called Oberlin in Ohio. So about 50 kilometers west of the city of Cleveland in Ohio. And my father was a professor there, and my mother was a nurse. And I had a wonderful upbringing, quite a progressive, isolated little town in what now would be considered surrounded by Trump land. But had a great, diverse, interesting childhood, and then went off to university in Chicago, went off to the big city.
You studied business, you ended up working in PR at Shandwick. They're a big firm. They actually have a branch here too. I mean, it's a massive firm that does PR. So you were doing campaigns for them.
I had a slightly different journey than your précis outlined. So I was actually working in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was recruited by Shandwick to head up what they then called the interactive division. So I had grown up with the internet. My father being a professor of science, I had my first email account when I was 7 or 8 years old, which would have been in the late 1970s. And so when the web came along and became of commercial interest, then I was actually headhunted into this firm to help kind of guide the interactive division, as they called it. So I was not trained in PR. I understood the technology and the medium, and was kind of an internal consultant in coordinating 10 offices across the Americas in how to advise their big corporate clients on using this internet thing. So that was the journey. So I was deep in the belly of the beast, without really understanding a lot of what was going on. But it was an incredible experience. Yeah, at the time, Shandwick had 154 offices around the world and had these massive global clients like MasterCard and you remember Compaq Computer and some of the others. So it was quite a time.
No, I can imagine. And the world was also changing in such an interesting way. And you were kind of in the US that was driving some of that change. So, okay, somewhere along the way, Kurt, you had a major shift in focus. Okay, you went from that to food. You have to talk me through that, yeah.
All right. So the journey to South Africa was really driven by my wife's career. So she's a professor. She's a paleoanthropologist. She's a professor at the University of Cape Town and had done her PhD research in the skeletal and fossil collections at Wits and in East Africa and elsewhere in the world. And when the University of Cape Town was looking for someone to lecture in human evolution, they opened it up to international candidates, and she was offered the position. And so in 2000, we picked up and moved to Cape Town and have happily been here ever since.
And
so that was the move. And I found myself commuting back and forth to the States, which was terrible, flying across the Atlantic and never living where I was. And in 2001, kind of severed that connection and had to reinvent my work context in South Africa, which wasn't yet in food. There was still another 10-year journey before I found myself in food.
Okay. So, all right. If we can sort of get to how you ended up in food, because that's your big focus now, and something you've spent a lot of time on, and something that I think you probably have some quite strong feelings on that I want to explore. So, I mean, what happened? Were you walking down the road? Was there an epiphany? Did you get hit on the head? Were you going from Damascus somewhere?
My wife and I had a child, and that was really the start of it. So we had been fortunate to bring a few dollars over in 2000, and we bought a house in Oranjezegt and weren't really thinking that we would have children. And as things go, one changes one's mind, and we decided we would and started looking at our community quite differently. And we saw our neighbors with kids on the street, but they don't play together. They don't go to the same schools. When kids go to the park, certainly in Arandizik and I think many other more affluent communities, they've got a nanny. Kids don't find themselves in play. People are fearful. There are walls and wires and spikes. And we were just anxious to raise a child in this environment. And the opportunity came along to help create a community food garden. And it was a chance to really try to find the village in the city, other like-minded people who wanted a way to connect, but really just couldn't find it. And so it was really a bit of a I don't know, not quite utopian, but like a wishful dream to get involved in something. And it wound up literally changing my life. I got involved in starting the Arandizik City Farm with some other volunteers. And it just provided such deep insight into community and the food system. And it clicked with the skills and experience and networks that I had and what the opportunities were to make a difference, in the city and in the world. And after a couple of years, that became my life's work.
The Arandizik Farmers Market, as I understand it, or the market, sort of exploded. It started, very small, and the next minute it was this big thing.
It felt like that to us too. So we started the farm in September of 2012, and the market started really without a whole lot of planning, driven by volunteers who were interested in kind of harvesting and good food and organic produce and so on before we had a harvest. And so some of the other volunteers and supporters had access to some organic produce, and they would donate it, and we would sell it literally on the back of a couple of hay bales to raise a bit of cash for this project. And then someone brought, a coffee machine, and someone brought some snacks, and then we needed a bit of a tent to cover that because, you've got sun and wind and other things. And before we knew it, we had, 8 or 10 tables. And after a year, we had about 1,200 people on a Saturday coming. You couldn't park anywhere in the area. And we were in conflict with the city over heritage policy because it was in the park that was a provincial heritage site. It just took off. It became the tail wagging the dog, or whatever the metaphor is, and went crazy. We actually got kicked out of the park. We had to shut it down. We wound up in the Premier's lawn at Leuwenhof. Helen Zille was lobbied by fans of the market, and we didn't miss a market. And once the farm and the market split, then this was in November of 2014, it really put us on two different trajectories and into different areas of the food system. So the market landed at the Vienna waterfront in June of 2015, and that was fantastic on a 3,000 square meter site. But it grew and grew and became really about kind of retail and consumer awareness and working with local farms and strengthening them. And it was in an area that those of us who were on the farming and food gardening side really weren't fully at home in, and it needed to become its own thing. It needed to fly. And so at the end of 2017, we spun it out and sold it off. And it has run independently ever since, but we have very close relationships, and the market is really an important kind of calling card and just kind of signature place where one can go to learn about parts of the food system. But it really does speak to the more affluent consumers and kind of that part of Cape Town that is, able to enjoy a farmer's market like that. And then the rest of us who were involved with the farm, we were able to focus on some of the other work, which we can talk about.
I've been to the farmers, to the market, and the prices do reflect that, I'm afraid. I did go
Indeed.
Wow, Cape Town is different to Joburg. You also have an academic career, and from what I could see on your LinkedIn profile, your academic career is actually also linked to food, right? And it's about risk and about food. So I'm presuming we're talking about scarcity here. We're talking about a lack of food and the current food systems.
So the academic link that you're referring to, the Global Risk Governance Program at UCT, is looking at kind of broad systemic risks, and food insecurity is definitely one of them. But it's really looking at broad systemic changes that are part of kind of bigger forces that are shifting in the world. So to use a simple example, if we think about the way that electricity is delivered, we are transitioning from these centralized grids that are driven by efficiency that states or governments deliver as a public good to residents. And those are brittle, they're fragile, and they're falling apart. And we're seeing this more hybrid setup where we've got local electricity generation, whether it's solar or private companies generating this, and this kind of transition from kind of state-run centralized systems, whether it's education or food or energy or water, we're getting now a more hybrid setup. And that is kind of devolving accountability, but also agency more into the periphery. So that can be seen in our JoJo tanks or our solar PV on our roofs, but also private players entering into this market who are providing that. So that's really the kind of patterning that the GRG, as we say, kind of looks at. And my area of interest is definitely on the food side of things. But these are all interlinked, so it's not exclusive.
So I mean, and I've heard this argument: we should sort of grow more of our own food near us. And I understand that. I mean, I'm never going to say you shouldn't. That would be ludicrous. I couldn't make that argument. But it is, if you want to buy grapes, it might be possible to grow grapes in South Africa during the season. It would be very expensive. Let me use a better example. If you want to grow rice outside of where rice is normally grown, you would have to use an awful lot of irrigation, so an awful lot of water. It is better to grow rice where it sort of grows kind of almost naturally, right? So the argument would be, yes, you can, the other phrase you could use would be near shoring it, You could grow certain things closer to you, but actually economically, it's cheaper to do it at scale and it's cheaper to do it where the crop almost wants to grow. I mean, would that be the wrong way to look at it?
Yeah. So I think what's important is that what we learned through, for example, through the pandemic, is that we need a hybrid system. We need to be able to grow food locally in case of emergencies and shocks, and so that our food system is more responsive to local consumers and local companies. We grow things that are more culturally relevant, that we're not entirely dependent on kind of lengthy supply chains and so on. But you're absolutely right. Rice produced at scale in a climate where it comes from is not only more efficient and ultimately less expensive, but can also have a smaller carbon footprint if it's done effectively. So one's got to look at the nuance, and it is a complex system. So we're certainly not, looking at some perfect system where everything is grown locally. But we can't also only be dependent on what's imported. Otherwise, if that goes bad for some reason, we're really stuck, and we realize that. So our system around seasonality is also something that we need to shift. So if it's out of season and you want grapes, maybe the best thing is to wait for the next season rather than having them flown in from wherever they might come from. But again, it depends on the nuance, it depends on the product. We need to look at the whole picture. And particularly when we're in an urban space where now most people are living in cities, it's almost impossible to grow the food that you need for a household or for a city in and around that city. We need to have, efficient, reliable value chains, but we also have to have resilience, right? We need to have a bit of redundancy and accept that, because then when there's a crisis, we've got something to fall back on and we're not as vulnerable.
Whenever people feel or talk badly about South Africa, I always just remind them we're a food exporting country. You'd rather be us than many other places if things go wrong.
Indeed, and we're food secure on paper. Absolutely. Yes. But the reality is that most people, I shouldn't say it that way, we have very high levels of food insecurity.
Yeah.
And so, when we talk about these issues, a lot of people talk about or turn to our farmers, who actually are incredible. But the farmers produce enough food. Yeah. The issue isn't the production side. And yes, we can do better. We can waste less, and we can have, less polluting supply chains and do less environmental harm. There's room for improvement, but we have enough nutrients and we have enough calories. But what we have is profound inequality in our society. So we have massive levels of food insecurity for a country of our comparative wealth. And we have something on the order of 30% of all children under the age of 6 are chronically malnourished in South Africa, which is an unconscionable level for a country that has enough food. And those are the problems that we focus on in our work.
I was going to come to that because that level had been going down until the pandemic and it shot up again. We're talking to Kurt Ackerman. He is your shapeshifter this evening, CEO of the South African Urban Food and Farming Trust. Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Kurt Ackerman is the CEO for the South African Urban Food and Farming Trust and a co-founder of the Oranje City Farm and Market. Your shapeshifter this evening. Kurt, you made it very clear and correctly so that our food system is unfair, and that obviously is linked to our inequality. And there's such long-term consequences for that, particularly for children who are growing up stunted. I mean, there are many things to this. It's about money. You can't really grow food without land. It's, I think, capitalism in a way. It's kind of South African society. I'm open to suggestions, and I realize I'm putting you in an impossible position. But I do wonder if it's, how much more is going to have to be done to see a change.
Yeah. The core of it really is the extreme inequality in our society. We can point fingers at the retailers. Our farmers are producing what they're asked to produce, enough calories and nutrients. One can't really expect retailers to sell at a loss. Our social welfare grants aren't sufficient to provide households without jobs, money so that they can buy a nutritious and calorie sufficient basket of food for their households. If there were less inequality, we would have enough food and this wouldn't be the issue. But inequality is the air we breathe in South Africa. And so the challenge is, what do we do in the face of that? And the approach that we've taken is to work in marginalized communities, working with networks of farmers to help build their assets, their own agency, the resources. We do that by connecting farmers, but it's about a lot more than the food growing, so that they're less vulnerable to the things that make life so difficult.
I mean, it's such important work, sometimes quite difficult work. I imagine that people are quite receptive to you, though. I mean, it seems that people are, and particularly farmers I've spoken to, take these issues incredibly seriously.
Yeah. So our work is focused in urban spaces, but we're inspired by the rural solutions that have been around for as long as there's been farming, which is the farmers' cooperative, right? When farmers club together, they can solve problems. They can share tractors, they can store seeds, they can go to market together. And that's what we do. We work in marginalized communities where there are existing community food gardens, and we help them take hands. We facilitate them getting together. We start by helping with bulk buying of what are called inputs. So if, for example, you're a farmer in Langa, where we do a lot of our work in Cape Town, there's nowhere in Langa to get your compost and your seeds and your seedlings. So you would need to get in a taxi. Usually, if you're living in that community, you probably don't own your own transport. And you've got to go to the garden center, which is in Nyanga. And there's a great one run by the NGO Abalimi Bezekaya. They've got one in Nyanga, one in Khayelitsha. You've got to go in a taxi, buy what you have cash to afford. You're going to pay for that and come back with a few 6-packs or a tray of seedlings and maybe a few bags of compost. When what you really need is 500 seedlings and 3 cubic meters of compost, but you don't have a vehicle to deliver it. You can't afford it. But when the farmers club together, we can have all of that delivered to them in Langa. It comes to them at the right time of year and the right quantity and quality. They can afford it. And so that's the fundamental model. The farmers connecting with each other, and they save 67% on average in their inputs. And then when they sell together, they get 2 to 3 times the price. So the fundamentals of that are sound, and that's the foundation then of building social connections and cohesion and other kinds of benefits. But the farmers are the foundation.
Good.
And you can see why people would want to do that, because the financial logic is self-evident.
Kurt Ackerman, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being our shapeshifter, CEO of the South African Urban Food and Farming Trust.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
US markets are up. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.